Welcome to The Thriving Marriage, the podcast for those who want to get their spouse back in love with them and truly thrive.
You'll learn why 95% of people don't save their marriage and the secret method no one else is talking about that will change everything for you. Are you ready? Let's turn tragedy to triumph.
Here are your hosts, international marriage experts, Mark Johnston and Heather Choate.
So welcome everyone here to The Thriving Marriage. I am Heather Choate and I'm with Mark Johnston, our international marriage expert. We just had a really fumbled start, so we're starting again, but we're happy to have you back, Mark. I know you just came back from running our boot camp and you've done several of these. So once more, if you don't mind, share with us a little bit about the boot camp, because I heard some really awesome things from the people that had attended and some really great results that people are already seeing. So tell us a little bit about what that was like.
Yeah, it was really great running through that experience. So we had a bit of a different format than some of our other programs. So I wanted something that was a bit more intensive, but also personal. So we kept the groups really small. You know, typically they're like 6 or less people. I think we had one group that was 8, but they lasted 3 days. They were about 3 hours long, and it was just great. I mean, I had a lot of feedback even during some of these meetings. I remember someone coming back during one of the breaks and saying, you know, I just tried some of the things that, you know, that I had been teaching them, and he used to tell me, like, instantly the tension in the room dropped, and just little things like that. I had other people breaking down in tears because, you know, just some of the messages were really, you know, that personal and that, you know, really transformative. So the big, just to give a rundown of what we talked about a bit, and we will be offering some more sessions with this. I really have been listening to a lot of feedback from all of you, what you've been looking for, and, you know, over and over again, I've been hearing that you all are having a hard time really gaining the trust of your spouse and helping gaining some cooperation from them in this whole process. And so I really wanted to go deep into what really creates cooperation within a relationship. How can you actually get there? And so we took, you know, each day was a different piece of what is, you know, how to be more persuasive, how to actually gain their trust, how to actually make them feel like they're heard, how to help them feel like there's a good solid plan. And like I said, it was great to run. I had a wonderful time, and I think a lot of the people who participated also did as well.
Awesome. That is really cool. So thanks, Mark. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
All right. So today we're talking about part 1 of We Can Reconcile. As Mark and I were putting together our outline, our show notes, we realized that this definitely needed to be broken up into 2 parts. So today we're going to share with you kind of what leads to this idea that we can't reconcile, right? What leads to a marriage having obstacles to reconciling, and what creates those obstacles so that we can talk about how to overcome those. So we're going to talk today about what prevents reconciliation so that we don't fall into any of those same kind of mistakes. But before we get to that, I'm going to share our client win of the week. And this one we'll say comes from a name change to Amber. And she says, when husband has canceled our divorce, with 2 clapping hands.
Hey.
He's moving back in and is willing to work on our marriage together. I've only been working on Relationship Reboot for about 2 weeks. Relationship Reboot is one of our courses. And so this is awesome results for Amber, that her husband has decided to cancel the divorce and wants to work on the marriage together. I really wanted to start with this win. And when I saw it today, I thought, oh, this is just so perfect, because as we're talking about reconciliation, we're going to go into a lot of the things about what prevents reconciliation. But I really wanted to show that with the right method, it's absolutely possible. So Mark, let's dive in. Let's get into the meat and potatoes here. What prevents reconciliation? Most people are here because their spouse is checked out, they're pulling away, maybe they are wanting a divorce or having an affair. What prevents most couples from really reconciling?
Well, that's a really good question, because, you know, logically, you know, we're talking about logic here in terms of, say, relationships and love, but, you know, long-term relationships, logic would kind of state, hey, you've invested a lot into this relationship, so shouldn't there be a really good effort at fixing things? And so, I was looking at this, why is there so much resistance? Why are so many people in our audience finding resistance from their spouse to working on the relationship? And, I do think that there's a number of different things here. From either they've lost hope, like they don't know how to fix this or what to do to fix this. I also think there's things like perceived negative intentions where they start judging these, the intentions of the spouse, and very likely all of you, or there may be some blindness towards positive contributions. I do think this isn't an exhaustive list, but I do think that these are some of the big factors here. So here's a question, solutions are out there. Why do you think so many people come to the conclusion that their marriage can't be fixed? This idea of lost hope, this idea that there is no solution to our problems. I don't know, Heather, do you have any thoughts on that? I mean, certainly we have lots of things to talk about here, but
if you're wondering that yourself, or if you've heard your spouse say that, then first of all, you're not alone, because this is really common. And in 2 podcasts ago, I talked about the 5 common mistakes most people make when their spouse pushes or wants out of the marriage, right? When they pull away. And so the biggest aspect is hope, is that I feel like I might be happier somewhere else, and I don't see a lot of hope that I can still be happy here in this relationship, is a big motivating factor for why most of our spouses choose to not see that hope. And we, on the other side, if we're the one wanting to save the relationship, we can start to lose hope because our culture, I'm going to say there's a couple of different cultural things here too going on, isn't really reinforcing the idea that it can be solved. We hear a lot of things like, if they want out, then there's nothing I can do. And frankly, most of the resources and methods out there aren't effective. And so that just leads into the story that there's really nothing I can do.
I do think that brings up a big point. Now, before I get into the big point, I want to get into some smaller points. I do think what you said right there is, and this being the big point, I'm going to circle back to it, but I do think a lot of people feel overwhelmed. They say, okay, I've tried doing all these things. I've given 150%, and I just can't work any harder, and it's just not working, and so I'm going to give up. Like I said, I want to put a pin on this because this is going to be a much bigger point. I'm going to come back to it. I do think there's other things that really drain hope away from, the ability to fix a relationship. First and foremost, I do think that a lot of people realize change is difficult. After possibly repeated offenses, there's, in the person who's pulling away, they say, my spouse, they keep disrespecting me, they keep not listening to me, they keep doing this or that, without really understanding how change really works, or without enough support, or the right kind of support given, or not communicating some of these frustrations or offenses. So they say, okay, change is too difficult. Or there might even just be a lack of awareness of the problem, and they see no motivation, which I still think is partially, lack of communication problems. Or, a little bit what you said is, if people want out, then it's just get out, it's too late. But I do think the big point here, coming back to this, that really drains any amount of hope, because I do think that pretty much everyone that pulls away from a marriage, at some point they say to themselves, I'm working on this, I'm trying to make things better. And at the same time, I'm also feeling overwhelmed, and I feel like I can't do this, it's too much for me. And I just can't try any harder. So because I can't do any more and I don't see my partner doing enough, I'm going to give up hope. Honestly, this is the wrong train of thought. Wrong train of thought. If you say, things aren't working well enough because I'm not trying hard enough. Heather, I mean, this applies to any any sort of problem. I mean, have you ever heard anyone express this sort of sentiment here? Like, I can't try any harder.
Right. Well, it really comes to the idea that why we created the PATH method, right? Because we kept running into this and we kept hearing it and even feeling it ourselves, that like, I keep doing all these things, I'm making all these positive changes. Why is my spouse not coming back? Why is it not working? Why is it not enough? How can I possibly give or do anything more, right? And so then we realized, you and I, Mark, after working with thousands of couples around the world, that we really needed to identify their story underlining this, because people were exhausting themselves. And you might be nodding your head, like, I'm exhausting myself. I'm literally like completely changing everything. I'm working on myself. I'm doing all these things. And yet everything just seems to backfire and push my spouse. My spouse just keeps like getting further and further away. So making positive changes must not work, right? Yeah. And I'm exhausted and I'm overwhelmed and I just can't keep doing that, right? And so it's not really about a matter of effort. It's a matter of having the right tools and the right support. And a big piece of that is having P in the PATH method, which is gaining perspective on their story, their narrative. Because until we change that, making positive changes alone is not enough.
I almost feel like this situation of feeling like you're not giving enough. It's almost like if you were saying, okay, I really want a nice house. I'm going to go and build a house here. I don't know much about building houses, so I'm going to go watch YouTube videos and I might ask some friends how I should build a house. They don't have a whole lot of experience themselves, but maybe a little bit more than me, and they might be able to give me some secondhand advice. But I'm going to go build my house. Well, that sort of situation, I imagine you can all imagine yourselves that the house isn't going to really turn out well. And even if that person says, I'm going to get up at the crack of dawn and I'm going to work all day and I'm going to put in so much effort into building this house, the house still isn't going to get put together right. It doesn't matter how much effort in this hypothetical house building circumstance, doesn't matter how much effort they put into it, it's still not going to be put together right. And so it's not a matter of effort, it's a matter of really researching who is the right support, what are the right tools. That's, if I had to say, put your effort anywhere, it'd be in that.
Yeah, it reminds me of like trying to fix a house with like maybe a toothbrush versus like a hammer and a drill. Like you might think that you're using the right tools because your friends did that, or YouTube videos say to do that, or even your counselor said to do that. But when it comes down to it, that's not the right tool for the job. So it's really crucial that we solve problems with the right method and with what's really going to work. Just like we would never put a Band-Aid on a cancer tumor, right? It's not going to be what's needed to build that really strong and healthy foundation so that you actually can reconcile.
But yeah, this is what I think it really gets in the way. This right here is the spouse pulling away, the spouse who says, I can't do anything about it here. I'm not going to do anything. I'm reading some comments here. One person is talking about how they work 2 jobs and their spouse doesn't work. And here's the secret. You're probably saying to yourself, I can't work any harder. But I imagine even your spouse probably feels some amount of feeling overwhelmed as well. Even though they're not working, outside of the home, otherwise they wouldn't, very likely they'd say to themselves, okay, well, sure, I could help out more here or here or here. Most people, in my opinion, they intend really well. They're not trying to cause harm. They're not trying to take advantage of other people. And if they are, it's usually because they themselves are very much hurting and feeling overwhelmed themselves.
That is exactly it. And just like if you don't know how to build a house, like we aren't taught, again, we've said this multiple times, but how much education have you really had in your life about marriage? How much education have you had, and coaching and feedback and actionable, solutions have you had to learn how to communicate, to build understanding with your spouse, to know how to set healthy boundaries, to how to identify their needs, how to help them identify and meet your needs, right? If we look at it, it's very, very minimal. And so it would be like if I just went to YouTube and I was like, okay, I'm going to build a house just with the little bits of advice I'm given here and there, it would be a complete disaster. And so
It's like, I think like there's electricity in a house or something. Maybe I should learn something about electricity. I'm not sure what exactly, it's, Heather and I, we study this all the time. I mean, I feel like I consume books on this left and right. I've read dozens of books and studied years and worked on this many years, and still I feel like there's a lot that I can learn about how to handle this better.
Right. And so just acknowledging that and even giving yourself some grace that like, I haven't known these things is empowering, because then you can say, you know what, I haven't known up until now, but now I can start to educate myself. Now I can start to empower myself. Now I can learn from people who've gone before me, and I can model what they're doing so I can have the results that they're having. And that's a really incredible step to take right there, to acknowledge that you haven't known and now you're willing to do something about it, to start to learn how to do it. Because anyone can, right, Mark? I mean, is there anyone that couldn't learn how to improve where they're at? We all can. That's why we're here on this earth. Even with our different circumstances and challenges, each one of us has the capability to improve ourselves. And so it's up to us to make that decision.
So the other piece here, so that was, I do think that people stop working because they feel overwhelmed. But I also think they stop themselves because they're saying, okay, my husband, my wife, they're mean. They don't like me. They're trying to cause me harm. Why would I want to work things out with them? They don't care about me anyway. All this stream of negativity comes pouring out, and I hear this on a daily basis from clients. So I can imagine many of you listening have probably heard something along these lines, like, you never cared about me, you didn't support me, and you're thinking to yourself, okay, here I was trying my hardest, and I was trying to do everything that I could, or I was focused on something good, and it's just what happened here. It's all thrown out the window. This is another huge piece about why reconciliation becomes blocked. My opinion here, this stems from really poor communication of expectations. I mentioned this just a little bit ago, but also really poor emphasis on what is actually working. I found, I actually wrote this into the notes here because I had a really interesting conversation with my wife, even just over the weekend. So over the weekend, my wife was taking care of the lawn, and she came to me the day after. She's like, you know what? I have to tell you something. She said, I was out raking some leaves and stuff, and I was thinking to myself, why isn't Mark out here helping me with this? Why do I always have to take care of the lawn? And she said, I was just grumbling and complaining about why Mark isn't helping so much. And then she came inside, it was on Sunday when she finally turned herself around. She came inside, and I had made dinner for everyone, and I had cleaned the kitchen. It was spotless, and I had done several other things in the house. I really like to cook, so I'd taken care of all these things. And she said to herself, you know what, I have to apologize, because I didn't even know this was going on. She's like, I was thinking very poorly of you and that you weren't contributing, and I was not focusing in on the many things that you do contribute towards. And we started talking about this. And this is the wonderful part about working in marriages, is that my wife and I can often, we can have these very open conversations, because this is just part of our everyday life of, trying to help all of you and coming up with content. Jen and I, we love talking together about this. But, over and over, we hear clients willing to bend over backwards to save their relationship, but consistently, we find those efforts are seen as selfish or manipulative or disrespectful, or they're just really, the intentions are poor. And it's exactly what happened here between my wife and I. My intentions were really good, and I was trying to help out. She was not seeing it. She actually thought my intentions were poor, that I was being lazy or something along those lines. Heather, what do you think happens here? Why does this happen?
It goes back to that narrative, right? That nasty story. It really creates a cycle where we start to see things negatively, and we view the world through those negative glasses. And instead of recognizing that there could be another way of looking at it, like we talked about a couple podcasts ago, right? Mm-hmm. We start to assume even neutral circumstances we interpret those in a negative way. And I know, Mark, you've learned a lot about positive psychology. You want to tell us a little bit about that? I think that would really help give us a perspective on where this is coming from.
I really liked this whole thing. There's a few like psychologists, other professionals that I really respect. One of them is a man named Martin Seligman. He founded the whole positive psychology movement. He kind of thought much of psychology is focused on why people are emotionally and mentally sick. And he said, I want to study, what makes people resilient, what makes people happy, what makes people thrive. And he even describes himself as a pessimistic sort of individual, and he liked looking at that. Why am I so pessimistic? He would say, but he would talk about how humans, just in general, it's a natural thing. We have a lot of negative thoughts throughout the day. Everyone does. I have negative thoughts. I have to talk to people about examining their thoughts every day. My wife has negative thoughts. We talk. We're very open about the kind of thoughts that we have with each other. So even though we, Heather, I imagine you the same. You probably have some negative thoughts now. Even people who are highly trained and very aware people have negative thoughts. We look for explanations on why we have these thoughts many times, and we look for some congruence, aligning our thoughts with our experiences. And so we say, I'm having these negative thoughts. It must be because of this. We like to have an explanation. And Seligman, he would say, it really takes a lot of effort. Effort is needed to recognize positive explanations for circumstances rather than just going with that flow of negative. And these negative thoughts become much more likely when stress is present or illness happens or new responsibilities pop up. And I want you to think about this. I remember, I'm going to butcher the number, so don't quote me on the statistic, but I think I remember seeing some sort of stat where the highest rate of divorce tends to be somewhere in the 7 to 10 year range. There's a big jump there, and then there's like a bigger jump, say, in people's 40s and 50s. But think about what's happening right then. Children are popping up at that point in people's marriages. Children, or if you had children early, they become involved in extra activities. You start getting new job promotions, new responsibilities at work, and if divorce didn't happen right at that stage, it might have set stage for some of this negative spiral that, Heather, that you're talking about. And later in life, think about what's happening then. Children are leaving the home, and you have a different focus. You're faced with a lot of other problems. And maybe the couple is faced with aging bodies where mortality is more deeply considered, or you might question yourself, what is my purpose now that my children are out of the home? I was just wondering, Heather, I'm wondering if any major life events happened. What major life events were happening, perhaps maybe when you've had some bigger struggles in your marriage? Can you think of them? I know you've shared your story a lot, but I want to make that connection right there.
Right. So one of the hardest points in our marriage, and we've been married almost 13 years now, was after finding out that we were having our fourth baby, our first daughter, and my husband started a new job. So highlighting here, the new responsibilities, the stacking responsibilities. Not only do we have 3 young boys, but now we're expecting a daughter, and my husband just started his own business. We relocated, and we're starting all over in a completely new community, and the stress level was just so high. There was more pressure on my husband financially to make this business work for us than he'd ever been under before. He'd always been an employee. And so while this was exciting and what we really wanted, that was a huge point for us. I felt maxed out. He felt maxed out. You talk about children responsibilities taking priority, health responsibilities taking priority, and job responsibilities taking priority, that our relationship really suffered. And we broke each other's trust, and we broke each other's hearts. And it was very challenging. And we realized that we had let these other circumstances of life really crowd out us in the picture. And I'm sure almost everyone can relate to that, especially if you've been married any amount of time or have even a single child. You know that there are those ebbs and flows of life like that. And then, of course, I've shared going through fighting cancer And when my husband started to reach out to his family for emotional support, it felt very threatening to me. And it was just more than I could take. You're talking about stress, you're talking about illness, you're talking about children, you're talking about everything all combining at once. It was like the perfect storm. And in fact, Mark, I got to be really real here. This is actually a big reason why I was driven to help people, because Ben and I saw many marriages completely crumble in these kind of circumstances. We saw a wife leave her husband of 44 years because she didn't want to be around when he died because he had cancer. Wow. And we saw a young mother with 3 children. Her husband left her and had an affair when she had 3 months left to live. So when you talk about adding on extra stress and these major challenges in life, if we don't have strong foundations as a couple and we're not prepared to meet those storms during the sunny weather, I'm going to say that, because that's really where the work needs to be done, is not in like that moment. It's kind of the crisis moment. It's kind of the test, if you will, of the relationship. And if you haven't been building up the strength of that relationship, because it's usually a slow decline. I mean, the things I talked about, those are kind of rare in life generally, at least I hope for most of us, but they come to all of us, right? It's in those easier moments. It's in those moments of just going through life and going through the motions of school and kids and work and all these different pressures, that if we're not vigilant in keeping up healthy, strong foundations, and we're going to go into this. I know I'm cheating. I'm cheating. I can't help it. I got to get to the solution. But that's really where the work's done. So that then when those bigger challenges happen, we are able to face them together and be strong together. But I can definitely relate, even just this last 2 weeks being sick, having the kids and 2 of them in major football. I mean, these are just normal things of life. If Ben and I don't make each other a priority, which I know you're going to go into later, that's when it really struggles. And that's when that negativity is so easy to take over. Just one final thought, because I know you're itching to say something too. We always talk about you have to keep your well full, and you have to make sure that you're nurtured and that you're cared for. One thing that I try to be very aware of with Ben, and I know that he tries to be aware for me, if we're both feeling really tired and really sick and really stressed, then we definitely need to make sure that we're not having like major like conflict resolution in that moment. Like we need to make sure that we're both feeling rested and feeling as much energy and filled up as much as possible, because it, like you said, that's when the negativity slips in, is when you're already run down, you're already exhausted, you're already giving so much to everything else. So it's really making sure that we take good care of ourselves and good care of each other, so that we can face those circumstances with the greatest chance of seeing things positively, of seeing things and working together effectively on that.
Yeah, for me, I think one of my most challenging periods was when I was going through grad school. And I was working 2 jobs at that point, and we just had our 3rd child. So this was a really trying period, but I don't need to go into too many details, but absolutely our relationship suffered at that time, because there's so many other things to focus on. I even just even recently, Heather, I've been sharing with you just a little bit here, but we've been having some struggles with one of our children and some behavioral issues. And I turned to my wife the other night and I said, Jen, I've noticed we've been struggling with this for a few months now. I've noticed some of our focus is pulled away from the relationship. I just said, I miss you a bit, and I want to see what we can do while we're working on this to make sure that we both feel like we're feeling good in the relationship. And so we came up with a plan. But it was nice to have that awareness and be able to prevent problems, having gone through things like that in the past. But absolutely, we know, you recognize, I recognize that if we don't take time to curb these sort of things, it's very easy to start getting stuck in that negative spiral where we start viewing the other person as a part of the problem rather than part of the solution. And it happens especially when that stress happens. It's just, when that stress rises, that's our natural response. We want to blame other people, as unhealthy as that is. But I think something very very much connected. And, before I move on, I am seeing a lot of people, I'm seeing a lot of people commenting here on just this exact experience. They're saying, hey, I noticed this and this and this, especially when I'm, I think someone mentioned also a cancer experience, and I'm also seeing someone with, multiple jobs, and how that's really impacted their marriage. It just reinforces the point. If it's not that they're, if it's not that they're perceiving extra negative intentions, I do think that another big portion of this is that blindness towards those positive contributions. I already shared the story, Jen raking leaves, but Heather, I'm wondering, can you think of a time when maybe you or Ben had to really shift your thoughts towards recognizing each other's contributions? Have you ever not noticed and said, okay, and I need to focus on something else? Does that sound familiar at all?
Oh, it's totally familiar. And like you, we just experienced this probably within the last 2 weeks. There's just so much going on. We have 7 children and we're expecting our 8th. And so anyone out there who feels maxed out in life and feels like they're being run everywhere and have all these different things they're going through, Mark and I were right there with you. We're in the day-to-day of life. It's not like we just come on this podcast and share this really rosy picture. However, we do have the tools and we do have the resources now that are able to help us to do that. And so we were both feeling burnt out, and I didn't know how burnt out Ben was feeling, and he didn't recognize how sick or burnt out I was. And so even like shifting the perspective on how we're spending our time or what we're doing, we both thought that the other person was being a little selfish, and we both had to re-examine that. I'm trying to think of a really specific example. Well, one is just with my husband's doing real estate and starting to get into putting together deals and stuff like that. And I had assumed that he was just on his phone, just enjoying some leisure time for hours over the weekend. And then I had to bring that up, and I recognized my interpretation of him was completely wrong. And he was doing it because he knows it's important for both of us. It's important for both of our goals. And I had to kind of eat that piece of humble pie. And so I always try to now question what story I've made about him and what he's doing and what it means, right? Because the story of my husband's on his phone a lot, he must be just completely absorbed in himself and wanting his own time while I'm running around with the kids, right? It can create a really negative experience, one that is actually completely false. And so it's very important that we have compassion and we have understanding and that we look for the good in people. You talked about how it's our natural inclination to look for the negative, and it is. We are hardwired to do that. And so recognizing that is good and it's important, but it's also equally true that we can change our programming in our brain. We can change the things that we look at. We can choose to build, just like a muscle, a stronger tendency to see the positive, to see the good, to choose peace over volatility or over conflict. We can actually develop that in ourselves. One of the things that I absolutely love about what Mark and I do, and the other coaches here at High Thrive Coaching, is we help to make those transformations in people. And we've seen people that were just like me. I was very negative. I was very critical. And we've seen them completely transform into a person that does see the good in people and other circumstances. And they experience immense levels of peace and security and happiness that wouldn't be found otherwise. What's interesting is the circumstances don't always change like they do change in time, but the way that we look at them changes. And then when we start to look at them different, then everything changes. I hope I articulate that correctly, but that's really the powerful thing that we do, and I love it.
Exactly. I'm reminded a little bit here of, I know a lot of people are familiar with the love languages. I'm drawing a blank on the author's name, but it's a fairly famous. There's a book out there, fairly famous theory. But this is exactly the sort of the thing that goes on is, we might say to ourselves, well, my husband or my wife is not showing me love. They're not showing me support. There's that blindness towards the positive contributions when the reality is they're probably just showing love or support or care in different ways. I don't know. It reminded me of that. This very thing happened with Jen and I. This was years ago, and it was a great realization to come to, that we both were trying to show each other love. It's just we weren't speaking the same language necessarily. And after we got a little bit used to not only accommodating what the other person needed, but also emphasizing a bit of our own actions, our own efforts towards showing love for each other, it really turned things around in terms of how it felt when we were both trying to give or receive care and love from each other. But
I want to highlight a comment here, because this is awesome. I don't understand how having a positive outlook and quote unquote seeing the good would help get my spouse back. I first want to question this and challenge this. Okay, so maybe you don't see that right now. Fair enough. Ask yourself, well, how is seeing the negative and seeing everything bad going to get your spouse back?
I do want to speak to that just a little bit, and I do understand the sentiment. So, maybe as parents or just in general in life, we say to ourselves, okay, if we tell someone else how things are wrong, it gives them an ability to correct themselves. If I go to a child and say, you need to stop, being annoying, you need to stop running around the house, they do listen to us. The problem comes in more when, in these more close partner-like relationships, and it's quite a bit different than, say, parent-child relationship. If you are just consistently coming at it from that negative side, like what you're doing wrong, what do most people do? They tend to shy away from those sort of things. Either you're going to get one of two reactions. You're going to get this point where the other person is going to get defensive and maybe fight back, or you're going to get a person who's going to shut down and not talk at all. People are going to find ways to feel better. And if in a situation where there is a lot of consistent negativity, or they feel like things are going bad, they're not going to put in a lot of effort into pushing past some of this discomfort of having this negative conversation. You're going to get one of those two reactions. In terms of what seeing the good does, I'm going to talk about that in context of both healthy relationships and unhealthy relationships. In healthy relationships, I do feel like it creates a much more open conversation. I know I have some big struggles in my life, and I know it was a big turning point for my wife and I when, instead of her being judgmental about some of the struggles that I had, she came at it with a lot of understanding, and it helped me to be much more open, and for her to give support for us to come at it more from a collaborative approach. I just to be very open, I would rather, I'm the kind of person that tends to avoid problems when I'm faced with something very uncomfortable, and so that's what I did. I avoided problems, and the problems didn't get addressed because there's this judgment and this negativity. So in healthy relationships, it creates a much more open communication, and that's what we're aiming for, a much more collaborative approach. Now, I can understand the argument for in an unhealthy relationship, we need, like I said, there's this inclination to point out what's going wrong. We need to let the other person know how you feel, and we need to set boundaries and stand up for yourself. But there are ways to do that, to respect yourself, while also not turning towards negativity. If I say I need to be able to respect myself, and I'm not going to sit here and take care of the house and do all these other things for you while you're doing these other things that are disrespecting me, that's one thing, but to say you never respect me, you're terrible, you're horrible, you're a horrible husband, you're a horrible wife, and you never loved me, well, that person is going to react in kind, and they're going to probably continue with their behavior, but they're certainly not, I can certainly would not predict cooperation.
I think this is from the same person, but I'm not 100% sure because we're not able to see their names, which is fine. I'm not talking about focusing on what she's doing wrong. I mean, if I am positive and looking on the good side, how does that change her story? Which is beautiful, because this means you have the awareness that the story needs to be changed, because that's the story that's been brought to life, and that's the story that you have to work against. And that's why making positive change alone isn't enough. So
yeah, this is where we get into the problem of, like, we take a podcast and we talk about one topic, but you can't use just one topic by itself to solve all the problems. Just to touch on this really quick, a big portion of changing the story and focusing on the positive is about, having a very strong or certain story yourself, a story about yourself, and how you might describe yourself, I think, is one key point. A second key point is your intentions and your efforts towards the other person, having a strong narrative about that, and a strong narrative about how you're choosing to take on their negativity. So, just to kind of explain that, if my wife the other day came in upset about the leaves, her doing the yard work, and I said to her, she started complaining to me and things like that. I said, I've been in here and I've been trying to support, trying to take care of some other things, but you seem really frustrated and you seem really upset. And I wonder, if you're frustrated about other things beyond myself. So I had a narrative. I came from a really healthy place, controlling the narrative about how she was perceiving me even. I was choosing to see it as, here's this other problem, and it's probably not me. And I helped control where that conversation went. This is a topic for another conversation, and we could probably spend multiple podcasts just on this right here.
That's true. And you can also go back and watch our Change Their Narrative podcast. I don't remember which episode it is now, but if you're newer to the podcast, make sure you go back and watch some of the beginning ones, because that is foundational to knowing how they all fit together. There's just another quick comment here. By being positive, you change how she will see you. Mm-hmm. Mark and Heather always say to change your narrative. And I know that we have Stephanie and a couple other crystal rock stars of ours on here that have done that. And I would encourage you to listen to their stories and hear their examples. Not only do you feel better, okay, who wants to feel better? Who wants to have peace, right? Who wants to be happy by having a positive outlook and choosing to see the good and being grateful even in the midst of hard circumstances. Not only does that give you peace and empowerment, right? It gives you to that calm, centered place so that you can be, like Mark said, and view even the relationship from a healthy place, that you create a healthy story about yourself and a healthy story even about your relationship. You hold that space for your spouse. So not only does that feel good, okay? Feels good because we're in positive, happier emotions, right? Which is also hint, more attractive. But we now create a safer space for our spouse, because someone that's positive, someone that's grateful, someone that's appreciative, someone that's understanding is going to feel safer than someone that's, desperate, demanding, threatening, accusatory, any of those other kind of common traps that we see that we can fall into. Thank you from Crystal and Stephanie.
Yeah, I'm just going to point out, like, a big piece of this, like the whole changing their story. It's not a simple topic, and I think even I could argue that a big portion of even the boot camp was kind of about this. And you know what? I took 9 hours working over the course of many days, and I still don't feel like I covered everything with a small group of people on this topic. There's a lot to learn, a lot that can be adjusted. I think we did cover a lot, but this is not a simple, like, if I just have this one piece of information, or if I do this one question, or if I have this one encounter, it's all gonna I have everything that I need. No, that's not it at all.
Right. The way I like to look at this podcast is Mark and I, we try to paint the picture of the house that you can build and show you the results that we're helping people get as they're doing that themselves, and show you that it is possible, right? But the full blueprint is only something that you can get when you really dive in and work on the relationship. Just like listening to a YouTube video, you're not going to learn how to build a house, right? Just listening to a podcast, you're not going to learn how to build a house. You will get the overall picture, and that's what we are wanting to inspire you with. And we're wanting to create a positive shift in the world to show you that it is possible and that we are doing it. And there are many people that are joining us around the world, and this is happening, and it can be your reality.
Yes. So I think we need to move to our marriage mythbuster. I think, I'm not sure, Heather might be frozen here. I'm not sure if she's connected. But yeah, I think it is time for our marriage mythbuster this week. So looking around, I was looking at comments and such, trying to figure out, okay, what would be a really good myth to bust? And I came across this idea that marriage is a lot of work. Heather, hi. I think we have you back now. Perhaps? Yeah, there you are, Heather.
Okay, I don't know what happened. I'm not even sure if we're still live. Are we?
I believe we are.
Okay. Sorry, everyone.
So yeah, we were getting into the marriage mythbuster, and I was saying
Absolutely. That let's do that.
The myth here is that marriage is a lot of work, and I certainly I do think that perhaps at times it can be true. But Heather, if that's all it was, if it was just a lot of work, I mean, would anyone really get married or want to stay married? Probably not, right?
Oh my goodness.
I was reminded a little bit of this. It wasn't that long ago. I remember my wife and I were out in public, and I'll admit, Jen and I, we're a bit terrible with the PDA, the public displays of affection. Jen likes to sit in my lap, and we like to hold hands, and we like to, be very close, even out in public. And someone made comments about that, and here we had our 5 kids. Someone just made a comment like, "Oh, it's so wonderful to see the two of you must be really in love," and they expressed some surprise, having 5 kids and us being able to appear happy. Imagine that. But I'm gonna say, I don't think this, I'm unique in this. I think, Heather, I think you have a wonderful relationship with Ben, but I still have butterflies in my stomach at times. I'm still really excited to see Jen, still very attracted to her. And I don't think the situation here is that, Jen and I just happened to be lucky, that we just happened to choose the right people. Nor do I think that, nor do I see building up the relationship. It doesn't even seem like a lot of work to me. So, where does this myth come from is, I do think that what happens is exactly what we were talking about earlier. There comes a certain point in your relationship when other things that you could focus on come into the picture, whether it's children or work or other responsibilities. And we start to say to ourselves, okay, our marriage is solid. We will put it on the back burner for a bit because the kids are the squeaky wheel here. They're going to keep squeaking until we do something about it. The work, they have demands. I have to do this assignment right now. And then I need some downtime for myself. I need to engage in my hobbies. And I haven't seen my friends in a while. I can see my wife or my husband any day. So I need to go see them and, whatever. When you start putting your priorities out of order, it makes adding on the efforts of marriage maintenance feel like work. It comes to that feeling of being overwhelmed. You can only have so many things going on at a time before it feels stressful to add more things onto the list. I can imagine many of you have probably encountered this situation. You're probably thinking it would be really nice to have some physical intimacy, to have some sex with my spouse. And they say, I'm tired, I'm feeling overwhelmed, the kids were this and that. And you think to yourself, okay, well, it shouldn't be all that much work. It's actually meant to be this connecting experience. But this is exactly what happens, is too many things are put on our plates. And so even the fun things to some, to many people might seem like work here. And it is a matter of priorities. Having all the other priorities before marriage, it leaves you tapped out. So when it is time for the marriage, it feels like work. That's why it feels like work. And the secret to making marriage not feel like work, you'll hear some banging on the door from my kids, is to make the relationship your first priority.
Speaking of kids.
Oh, yeah. I love working from home, and I appreciate all the patience that people have, when things like this happen. People tend to be, you all are generally very understanding with this, and I appreciate it. But, making a relationship your first priority, it might mean, this is going to be a big gasp from some people, maybe cutting back on children's activities. What's going to happen if we cut back on, on Johnny not having 2 or 3 sports sports that he's involved in concurrently, or whether one of your other kids is involved in dance and swimming and karate. That might seem like shocking, like that's their life and they need these activities, but honestly they probably need you being happy in your marriage much more than they need karate or swimming lessons. It might mean being okay with mediocre dinners sometimes. We had pancakes for dinner last night. We had a rough day, and normally food is really important to me. I like having a nice meal, but I knew I had to let that go. It might sound like such a small thing to let go, but I really like having some nice meals. I had to let that go and say I need to focus, instead of me making the dinner myself, because if I want a nice meal, I'm going to be the one cooking it. Instead of me making the dinner myself, I need to focus in on taking care of my wife. Might mean being okay sometimes with a messy house, or telling others no when they ask you to hang out or when they're asking for favors. It might mean allowing the children to occupy themselves or be bored or take care of themselves. A great example with this, so I came from a big family, just like, Heather has 7 kids. I came from a family of 8. Jen and I have 5 kids, but I survived, and my parents were not giving me tons of attention. We didn't have lots of lessons, and it would have been impossible. But the big example was my parents every week had a date for as long as I could remember. They celebrated their 50th anniversary several years back. Very happy together. It's because it never felt like work to them, and they made sure that their priorities were in the right place.
I know as a mother and as a parent, we want to give our children the very best. And I don't think any of us probably intentionally or consciously say, I'm going to put my kids above my marriage. I think it's just something that happens gradually and slowly, and that wanting to nurture and provide both of those masculine, feminine energies there, nurture and provide, right? They can be very, very strong, and we can get caught into maybe a bit of a slippery slope if we're not careful. I just really want you to future pace whatever decisions you're making, whether that be a job, whether that be your friends, whether that be a hobby, whether that be your children, and say, if I continue in this way for the next 10, 15, 20, 30 years, what will the consequences be, both positive and negative? And if it's not where you want your marriage to be, then maybe re-examine those. I also challenge you that none of the children I've ever met or have ever talked to, even adult children that have had divorced parents, ever wished that they'd gone to one more soccer practice or been in one more dance recital. No, they wished that their family had been together. And so I can assure you that being connected as a couple is the most powerful example that you can give your children, and the most precious gift you can give them, because children crave security, and they crave knowing that they're safe and that they're loved and that they're in a stable home environment.
I want to call out someone on the chat. It was earlier in the podcast, and they were talking about how they work 75, 80 hours a week. And I applaud you for how much you're trying to provide for your family. At the same time, is that absolutely necessary? Because I can only imagine, working 80 hours a week leaves very little time for the relationship, which may, be where some of the problems are cropping up. Now, I'm not here, obviously I don't know enough about the situation to pass judgment. I don't ever want to feel like I'm passing judgment on anyone here, but that is an example of, hey, working long hours, now there's a lot of resentment being built up because there's no time for the marriage.
Yeah, so I would agree with you, Mark, in this marriage myth buster. I've honestly said this myself. Marriage is hard work. And what makes it hard is when I'm not putting it first. What makes it hard is when I've let it become hard because I didn't have the healthy foundation in place. I've let it become hard because of neglect on my part. I'm just being honest and saying from my own perspective. I'm not saying this is what you're doing at all. Anyone who's listening. But marriage is beautiful and it's blissful and it is the highest connection that we can have with another human being. When we put it first in our lives, we experience immense joy. And that's exactly what I have with Ben. Totally those butterflies. We get asked all the time if we're newlyweds. People think that we're a blended family because we have so many kids. They all look like Ben and I, but people still wonder, are you newlyweds? Is this your first baby together? Things like that. Because we have that spark. Why? Because we've made a priority, and it's the most gratifying and nourishing, and it just feeds itself. It's something that becomes almost effortless because the rewards are so much greater than the effort that is put into it. So I agree, Mark, marriage is not work, marriage is bliss. And so I just hope that all of us can work towards those most important things in our lives. Here at High Five Coaching, we believe that marriage is sacred and that family is sacred, and so that we should nurture and honor it. All right. Thank you so much, Mark, for joining us. Next week, we're going to share with you part 2 of the reconciliation. I'm more excited for this, honestly. I think it's important to know what prevents reconciliation and what leads up to these points. That's very important to have, but I always want to talk about how to solve problems.
I was going over this, and my wife looked over my shoulder. She's like, you're focusing way too much on what's going wrong. And I was like, yeah, that doesn't quite feel right. And so, we do want to acknowledge that. Heather and I really like to focus on what's going well and the positive parts of things. So much more excited about, what's actually needed for reconciliation. What factors actually help it out?
And that being said, I encourage those who have joined us today, if something stood out to you, if something resonated with you and you said, oh, yep, I'm doing that. I can learn some new skills now I haven't known up until now how to save my marriage, but I'm going to find the right method. I'm going to build up that hope in myself. I'm going to start to turn things around and build up that positive muscle in my brain so that I can view the world in a way that empowers me, that fulfills me, that gives me peace and gives me strength as I move forward. I encourage you to do that and check in with us here in the Thriving Marriage Facebook group or in our newsletter and let us know how you are doing. We appreciate you all, and we will talk to you soon. Thanks, Mark.
See you, everyone.
Thanks for listening to The Thriving Marriage, your A to Z blueprint for not just surviving marriage, but thriving. Until next time, my friends, thrive on.